Public notices were provided Tuesday, May 10th, and second on Friday, May 13th. Because this is an informal roundtable discussion, we really didn't have, we weren't subject to the open government law, but we did invite members of the Guam Contractors Association, the Guam Chamber of Commerce, I believe GHRA, and we reached out to other stakeholders to inform them of this roundtable discussion. This is a result of a submission of proposed rules and regulations governing the contracting of an independent environmental health inspection company to conduct inspections of temporary workforce housing, which was submitted by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, Division of Environmental Health, via the Office of the Governor. I want to thank Senator Tom Atta for joining me here this morning. Senator, thank you. Thank representatives from Division of Environmental Health, Cindy and Tom Nadu, the administrator, and also Mr. Martinez, the president of the Guam Contractors Association. So maybe, Tom, what we can do is have you go ahead and start and be able to just give a background of what these proposals are, and from there we could have the dialogue.
Yes. Good morning, Day Senator, Chairman, and Senator Atta. Chuck, how are you doing? Yes. So in front of you, well, what we've done, the Department of Public Health, is pursuant to Public Law 30-64. It was codified as under Chapter 26A, Temporary Workforce Housing. The Department of Public Health was essentially instructed to develop rules and regulations according to the government procurement procedures and according to duly approved rules and regulation to establish the certification and operating parameters of a contracted independent environmental health inspection company. But it was with the understanding that this rules and regulations will be implemented upon adoption only if the Division of Environmental Health is unable to fulfill its mandate per the law, which is to inspect all the temporary workforce housing in the different phases. And in response to the mandate, we did prepare a rules and regulation. It was actually, the first version was actually submitted in December 3, 2010, but that was in the transition of the administration, so there was a resolution passed by then Legislature to return all the proposed rules and regulations back to the department. Unfortunately, due to other competing priorities, this was temporarily placed on hold and focused on the other regulation, such as the rules and regulations for the actual requirements to operate a temporary workforce housing. So upon the adoption of that, which was through Public Law 33-21, we went ahead and went back and revisited the current proposed rules and regulations, which has been entitled, it's a long one, Rules and Regulations Governing the Contracting of an Independent Environmental Health Inspection Company to Conduct Inspections of Temporary Workforce Housing. Its short title is, actually it's no better, Rules and Regulations for Third-Party Inspection of Temporary Workforce Housing. And these proposed rules and regulations, especially what it essentially does, as the statutes indicate, is develop a parameter in essentially contracting of a private vendor to perform the inspections of temporary workforce housing in accordance to law and per proposed regulations. And I think it's important to add that this was the statute, Public Law 30-64, was created at the time when there was a understanding or assumption that there would be the large military buildup. And Senator Atta recognized how limited we were in terms of staffing and resources that maybe we need outside assistance to do so, and thus the law. And currently, the status of that is that there's approximately 150 or so. No, I think that were 120, 115 temporary workforce houses. Temporary workforce houses? Housing units, okay. I'm trying to be grammatically correct. Permitted with our department, our division. And there was also a funding source identified to allow this to happen, which was a DPHS Sanitary Inspection Revolving Fund. And we've had challenges in terms of having access to the fund, and we did eventually hire one inspector, environmental public health officer, and she was with us for less than a year. So unfortunately, we couldn't utilize her presence to do the inspections. Um, Unfortunately, we did not do a single inspection of dormitory facilities last fiscal years. It's just not one of our high priorities. Also, plus the fact that we lost the staff, we lost that momentum of doing so because she has to go through training and all the other prerequisite to do independent inspections. But we are in the process of recruiting another employee through that funding. But that's a challenge in itself. So hopefully by end of this fiscal year, we have a staff to do just that, which is to inspect temporary workforce housing based on the phases, which is mentioned in the statute. Which, by the way, I think is really great. It's what we do for other regular establishments. It's kind of a risk-based management of our regular facilities. Thank you.
Tom, can you just explain the one staff that you had that was tasked to do the inspections of temporary workforce housing? Why did this person leave? Because I know you went through a lot to train
Yes, we
them.
did. In fact, we had invested a tremendous amount of resource, time, money into our training, and she got married and decided to relocate elsewhere. So we lost that.
Okay, so it wasn't because of the pay of the position, or
at that time, no. At the time, it was not.
okay, and so you're recruiting for that position now.
Yes, and in fact, the first individual, she had declined. We don't know for what reason.
Okay. Senator, you have anything, or Mr. Martinez? Can we just turn on the?
The funding comes out of the $91 that's appropriate, or that's charged to the company per year per H2 worker. Is that correct?
That's registered, yes. That's correct, sir.
Senator?
So, first of all, I guess when the law was introduced, which would authorize environmental health to outsource this particular task, it was under the assumption that H2 laborers were going to be coming in by the boatloads, essentially, and that there's going to be a lot of workforce housing coming up all over the place, and so with workforce housing in particular, there was going to be a need to ensure that the sanitation and other issues are closely monitored and controlled. Now, the fact that the underlying assumption that we were going to have hundreds and thousands of H2 laborers coming in, from which we would be setting aside $91 per head to be able to fund the outsourcing. How will environmental health be able to fund then this outsourcing?
Senator, I don't believe, and I don't want to make light of this proposed rules and regulation. It's required. We developed it almost 6 years ago, and we went through the process, and here we are. But currently, based on a number of temporary workforce housing that we have, we could meet the expectations or basically the requirements of the law we can do it by a staff of one. Prefer two comfortably, depending on how compliant the 100-some temporary workforce housing units are. So I don't foresee us needing to seek third party to do these inspections at this moment.
Okay.
Now, of course, if we do get the number that we had calculated almost 10 years ago, actually, think about it, I think that would reflect on the statute, which indicated the number of employees necessary. And at this time, I don't believe it's necessary that we obtain all those numbers of employees, and we should be able to fulfill our obligation with two.
Okay.
So we do have the funding to recruit two more if necessary. As to whether that's sufficient to employ all the numbers that's indicated in the statute, if those, how many, 10,000?
Yeah, we talked about
10,000.
temporary workers coming in.
We got some extra mics there, so maybe.
That's right. Yeah, we don't have to share everything, Cindy. Yeah. So currently, it's doable with the funding, and if we get the staff from that fund.
Okay, so I was just asking that question to see if we needed to explore other sources of funding for this outsourcing of the inspection of workforce housing, temporary workforce housing.
Specific to this housing, it will be manageable with the funding and the staff we're to get.
Okay,
Just specific to temporary workforce housing, yes.
okay, fine.
Does the funding only cover salaries, or is there other costs that are involved?
Yeah, well, this funding is also to allow contracting of the private third party to do the necessary inspections if we're unable to fulfill our obligation after all the required number of personnel has been recruited. But at this time, as I mentioned, that's not necessary. So thus, even if these rules and regulations were adopted, I doubt it will be implemented, at least anytime soon. And as to whether we'll have the funding back, I don't believe so. But then again, the revenue should increase with the increase in number of migrant workers. So until we get the actual number, it's uncertain. But currently, as we stand, we should be able to meet our obligations, Senator.
Okay. That basically is the gist of my general questions. And
So Tom, on what would be the trigger? Because now you have about 115, 120 units. What would be the trigger for you, for the department, in the future, to make the decision that you do need to outsource or contract out the inspections?
That's a legitimate, very fair, legitimate question, Senator. Obviously, we would have to have the funding to recruit all the numbers indicated in the law. I think there's like total 10 to 15 number of personnel that will be required. And that's not just inspectors, but also the other administrative support staff, I believe. Upon recruitment of all of them, and we're no longer able to meet the timeline expectations indicated in the statute, then I think that would be the trigger. I know it sounds very broad in my response, but really it does come to that. Do we have the staff? And are these staff number sufficient to meet the expectations as per the statute? Then if not, then that's when we need to probably contract the third-party vendor, assuming there's even funding to do so at that time after all the recruitment.
I know, again, we've asked this in previous legislation recently, but the sanitary revolving fund, what is the balance you have there now?
Current balance, and when I say current balance, that's inclusive of the lapse fund as well as those amounts that were not appropriated to the Division of Environmental Health. Last, at least March or so, was 600-some thousand. I don't, unfortunately, not bring that number, but it's around 600-some thousand.
And that's the use for employees, for
Employee
staff
salary, everything that's necessary
incentive that may be coming, and supplies as well for the operations of the.
I'm not going to play a lawyer, Senator, as I mentioned during the last hearing. That's how we interpret it. Maybe there's legislation required to explicitly mention that. I'm not certain, but we're under the impression that this should for operation environment health. But others may interpret as specific to this type of operation. I'm not really certain, Senator, how to interpret it except that way.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Cindy? Nothing. Okay.
So comments.
Senator.
so,
Would you like mine?
So as I was going through section by section on the rules and regs, we classify the health inspection companies as potential and independent. So they become independent when they have been given when they have been contracted by the division. Correct?
Yes and no. In fact, I went back and looked at your question, and I can understand the possible confusion in all this. When it was first developed, the concept was, well, it still is, I'm sorry, because it's proposed, that there would be a And I apologize in advance if I misuse the word. I'm not a procurement individual, and our division rarely does this. Plus, it's handled by someone else. We would have a contract out where we would select one or more private vendors to do just this, and they will be identified award, if you will. But based on our need, they'll be given a particular number or a particular set, if you will, of inspections and which facility to do. Now, if there's obviously only one offered, then of course that person will get the entire contract, if you will. But our position is it's best to have multiple, because we were at the time when this was being developed, there were several who at least showed interest, more than one individual. So we were thinking of having multiple contracts under one, multiple vendors under one contract, if you will, and basically evenly distribute the number of inspections that we can't handle. So they are potential until they're actually given that number or that particular assignment task. if you
Correct.
will.
Yeah, and so I guess the procurement concept would be then to go out and solicit and competitively award a contract or several contracts depending on the population of workforce housing units, and would probably resort to what they would call the indefinite quantity, where you will be then that whoever's awarded the contract would be the outsourced partner for the environmental health division, and as the need arises to have inspections conducted, a task order would then be given. So it could, so in a span of a year, there may be a need for only 10 inspections, or there may be a need for 100 inspections. And so depending on the need will be determine how many inspections will be done. So that's kind of how I was thinking. But we as we go through the rules and regs, it clearly shows that a potential environmental health company means someone who has been certified but has not been contracted. And then when you become contracted, according to the rules and regs, then you are classified as an independent, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I guess it just wasn't quite clear, because I guess in the procurement world, the agencies will send out a request for interest. And, we have these, we are looking for companies who would be capable of being certified to provide inspection services. If you're interested, please submit your documentation and we'll put you on a short list. And I guess that's what this potential environmental health inspection company and the list that will be provided, I guess that's probably the purpose of that. Right?
That's correct, Senator. I'm not familiar with the terminology and
Right.
procurement, but that's essentially comes down to, Senator.
Okay,
yes,
fine. All right, good. On page 4 of the rules and regs, I was just kind of curious about the definition of satisfactory rating. Satisfactory rating means the letter grade A issued. What happened to the A, B, C, D, and F?
Right. So anything below A would not be satisfactory, it would be unsatisfactory, which would cause that particular business to go down to the next level, next tier level. Phase, I think is the terminology. So because if you, of course you wrote that law, Senator, if you meet so many number of consecutive inspections that are satisfactory
Right.
in A grade, you move up to a higher tier, which would be less frequent inspections.
Correct.
And so what would determine whether you go up or down or stay the same is essentially satisfactory, which is A grade. So if you get anything below less than A, like a B or C, that's unsatisfactory, which would drop you to the lower tier, which requires more frequent inspections.
Right. Okay. All right. So it's either you get an A or you go back and start all over
Yes,
again
sir.
in establishing your credibility.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, then that's all right. So now I understand that. On page 7, one of the the rules and regs establishes on line 1 there, it says it establishes some of the minimum qualifications of this inspection company. And one of the requirements there, for example, on line 5, it says that the individual, the company must have an individual who has level qualifications equivalent to the environmental health officer or supervisor of DEH. But one of the things is that individual, the ability to provide guidance to less experienced employees, conduct highly complex to sensitive inspections, the knowledge and experience to identify all potential environmental health. That's asking quite a bit. So maybe they're just to basically, I mean, I guess a term that would be as a compromise is, that can identify common potential environmental health hazards as opposed to all. Well, that's but then now, I guess now from the legislative process to accept the rules and regs, if we let it sit for 90 days, as is, it goes into effect. If we're going to make a change of just one word, we have to introduce a bill to accept it, do a public hearing, goes on the floor and all that. So, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we're going to need to consider. I mean, for me, that may not seem to be that significant, but if you've only got 2 environmental health companies who are competing for a bid, that may be reason to protest the bid, because there's no way that company can tell me that he can identify all. And so from that standpoint, that term there may be significant.
Does the department have a checklist when conducting inspections that can make reference to the potential health hazards as it relates to the workforce housing?
Right. We do have rules and regulations for conducting inspections of temporary workforce housing, and there is what you call a checklist. Actually, what it is, just an outline, if you will, of all the various requirements, and we use that to allow the inspector to make sure he had looked into those particular items that's required per the regulations, which I guess what others call a checklist. Yes.
So maybe we could use that, Senator, for...
Well, so far as rephrasing that,
Yeah,
maybe.
so rephrasing it.
Yeah.
It's not open-ended at all, right?
Yeah. So-
Understood. Actually, I actually understand what you're saying, Senator.
Then on page 9, inspections by an independent. On page 9 there, section 42112 says an independent inspection company who has been certified shall conduct sanitary inspections only on behalf and at the direction of public health. As mandated in the law, public health shall contract the independent health inspection company only as a last resort after attempting to hire the required number and positions. So I guess that begs the question. So what's your status insofar as filling your staff requirements? I guess the way I'm interpreting, the way the law was it said, if you just can't hire the people to do the work that needs to be done, then you can go out and outsource it. So given that, I mean, is it reasonable to say that you probably don't have the staffing that you need right now to do workforce housing and all the other inspections? That actually there's nothing holding you back right now to outsourcing the inspection of workforce housing, so that you can take whatever inspectors you're using now to do that, to backfill and do other inspections that are are lagging?
If we were to focus, rephrase that. I guess if we were to focus on temporary workforce housing, we were able to do it today.
Okay.
But again, we have other competing, other higher, I guess call it higher priorities, such as foodborne food safety program.
Right.
So, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, mosquito vector.
Oh, of course, and currently, of course, the mosquito surveillance control program. So we're prioritizing based on our resources. Can we do this today? If we change our focus, yes, we could, Senator. In fact, if we were hire this vacant position that we're trying to fill right now, that's a start, and I'm confident if that employee was focused just on temporary workforce housing, we can meet the requirements of the statute. We prefer two, only because the reality is I think it's not all temporary workforce housing will be able to meet the tier or phase one, I can't call it phase one or tier one level, which means they'll probably require 4 times a year inspection. And it's not that it cannot be done by one staff, but it'll definitely be a challenge. Considering that we do have kind of unforeseeable events such as an outbreak, whether it be related to temporary workforce housing or other outbreaks. If that person will just focus on that, I think he or she could be able to do it. But I prefer having more than one in case the person's absent or training or whatever, and we have someone else to support that role.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope I was able to answer your question, Senator.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, well, what I'm just thinking is that maybe you're operating, I don't know, what's the staffing level that you're authorized? You're probably authorized 10, 15 inspectors, but you probably only have half of those positions filled because people just aren't available with the qualifications required to be hired.
I think the best I can answer that is if we were to pursue our mandates and meet all the requirements, obligations of the mandates, we would require a total of 70 personnel. That's inclusive of administrative support staff, and we have less than half of that. And our current ratio of inspector to regular facility is like 1 to 1,000. And the reality is, and I mentioned this many times, that's just an unrealistic obligation to the division.
Right.
So we prioritize based on risk, and we also focus a lot on education.
Okay. All right. Page 11, line 7. It has to do with section 42114, inspections, trainings, and meetings. And this particular section of the rules and regs talks about the private health inspection company having to attend initial orientations and all that stuff and other requirements. And on page 11, starting at line 7, it lays out the requirement that private health inspection company must immediately notify Division of Environmental Health of inspections resulting in the suspension of the operator's sanitary permit. And when I read that, I interpret that to mean that that private inspection company can go out there and do an inspection and say, and add up the demerits and say, you flunked, shut it down. Now, is he going to have that authority? That's kind of the way I read this here, or is the extent of his authority is to go out there, do the inspection, and then if it seems like it warrants a suspension of the sanitary permit, he has to bring that back. He has to bring that back to your division, and you're the one that then issues that penalty.
Yes, they would have to contact and notify us. It's not that they can't. Well, actually, by proposal, they have to notify us, and very likely we would probably go through the 21 questions, as to the reason why, what their findings are, and whether it's an actual suspension or lowering of the tier, I guess, right? Yeah. Then, depending on by case, the severity of that action. But you're right, Senator. Ultimately, it'll fall upon the Division of Environmental Health to determine whether we'll be supporting that action. It's very possible that maybe a simple miscount to a violation that was actually corrected on site, or that can be corrected on site.
Yeah. So I guess that's not how I interpret line 6. That maybe line 6 needs to be rephrased to read that they must immediately notify environmental health of inspections which warrant the suspension of the operator's sanitary permit or whatever, and not that their inspection has resulted in the suspension of the permit. It just maybe it's just semantics. I'm not as concerned about that as I am about that one that he has to be able to identify all deficiencies. So that's, you might want to take a look at that if we're going to take it to another step.
I'm sorry, Senator, did you have preferred language for that then?
Only maybe language to the effect immediately notify DEH of inspections which warrant the suspension of the operator's sanitary permit. You've got to immediately, they go in there and they find that there's rats all over the place, half of the toilets don't work. You got to report that immediately. So that would be the language that I would use as opposed to saying inspections resulting in the suspension, which suggests that he's already suspended them. Okay. So, and that's, Mr. Chairman, is the extent of.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. Thanks, Senator Ada. As you know, he's the author of the initial initiative to give public health a tool that it needs. Because of that time, there was that assumption of a huge number of temporary workforce housing that would be needed here. And so I want to recognize him for his efforts to providing this tool to public health. So as I see it now, this is not something that is really going to be used anytime soon, because with the number of units you have now and the efforts you're making to recruit at least one or even two to dedicate this, to dedicate personnel for this, at least for me, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't seem like this is something that you are looking at, the department is looking at taking advantage of, anytime soon. But we don't know, things could change, right? So it's important that we have this, and we pursue this. We'll make a determination whether we need to make these changes now, because as the senator said, we do have to introduce a bill, go through the whole process, and then and see how it turns out then. If not, it just lapses into law, and whatever we have here is adopted, and then there's still that opportunity to come in and make some changes in the future, right? So we'll make that determination. But Mr. Martinez, did you have? Yes. Yeah, it has to be done that way, or the department can come back again later to amend these existing rules once it's been adopted. So, Mr. Martinez, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, it's pretty much.
Can we just, is it on? Your mic on?
And there were a few questions that Senator Ada certainly addressed that, I wasn't really aware of. And that's just basically the language, but I think it's a good idea to outsource, especially challenge the department has with personnel right now. But I think, what was your ratios, 1,000 to 1?
For all health regulated
for all-
establishments. Right, that's inclusive food establishments as well. So.
We're only talking about 150 establishments for workforce housing.
Right.
So that's just 1/10 of,
Which we'll be able to
Of an
fulfill
employee.
once we get that employee.
yeah.
Yes.
So, Tom, just before we close, are there any problems with temporary workforce housing now that you guys have seen, at least when you were going out and doing inspections?
I think, like as I mentioned, last year we did not inspect a single temporary workforce housing. It's not that they're not warranted. We get a lot of our inspections are initiated by public complaints, whether by neighbor or consumer or whatever. And last year we did not receive any complaint of it. Not that there was any problem, but simply we didn't get to prioritize and put on our list of things to do for that week or that year. As to how are they now, I couldn't tell you, Senator. I really couldn't. I can't. But usually the public is pretty good about sharing with us how condition of at least their community. And last year we didn't receive a single complaint about temporary purpose houses. Whether that's true or not, I can't say. But simply, a lot of our investigations are initiated by complaints, and we have not received any from last year. So I very broadly can say, I guess it's not as a problem as it was in the past, where we used to get complaints about such facilities, but not recently, Senator. But definitely requires a follow-up inspection, obviously.
So the number you have now, the 120, is that a standard amount that we usually have in terms of the amount of units?
It's grown over the past couple of years, but only from something like a number of 80 to 85 to 90. And as Tom said earlier, most of them are the small 5-person apartments. You can get 4 or 5 people in there. And I think that might also contribute to the lack of complaints that we get, because they're more integrated into the community rather than a large standalone barracks that nobody goes to, and so nobody can see the problems. Here it's like, I live in an apartment building and 2 of them are filled with temporary workers, and if they're not using water or there's no power in them, then somebody would know. So we have a lot more, and as you said, smaller ones scattered throughout the island with that, and just very slowly growing, maybe 3 or more new ones per year.
So lastly, Mr. Martinez, so do you should we anticipate a rise, an increase in the number of workforce housing in the near future, based on what you're seeing out there? Because I think that would also give us indication whether how to move with this, and how to look at your needs as well moving forward.
Yeah, I know there's no indication that they're going to reopen the big Okadu workforce housing anytime soon. I don't think it's going to happen. So we're going to be seeing a lot of these companies with smaller amounts of temporary workers living in, like I said, apartment complexes or small housing units. So there's going to be more of those type of housing versus bigger, 100 plus type housing units for the workers.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I think it gives us a good sense of where things are going. Yes.
I just yesterday I had actually called Mr. Nadeau because I didn't understand how the process worked, but I was at a food establishment, and they had their grading sheet up. It had an A. It got inspected, I guess, at the beginning of 2014, and it's said on the second line, due for re-inspection in 2014. It's, gosh, it's kind of like we're long overdue. But then he explained to me that they were in a risk tier that did not require them to be inspected every year. But the way the placard read, it's like, wow, public health is really behind the curve here. So maybe you need to take a look at how you, so that if they're now in a higher tier, which means that they get less, and they require less inspections, then somehow that thing has got to reflect, that.
Yeah. Senator, it was a balance that we had to find, because what we didn't want was have a placard, letter grade, without any kind of information behind it, because there's some placards that are literally fading on the window because they have not been inspected and changed. So it's kind of informed. I want the public to have an informed decision. If they do, like you just did, Senator, in fact, you recognize it's been 2 years that they're last inspected. By law, all establishments, regardless of the tier that we develop as a policy, they're required to be inspected 4 times a year. So it's a balance. Well, if we mention it 4 times a year, then we'll really be behind the curve, because that's what the law basically says. But at the same time, we established this internal policy of tier level, and that's more manageable for us. But at the same time, maybe the public may see that as, well, they haven't inspected like 2 years, so it must be awful, or. So it's finding that balance where inform the public without, at the same time, it comes down to that. Inform the public of the recent inspections and when they should be inspected again. but rather than not putting anything on the placard, which in the past was basically just a grade and that's it.
I guess I wasn't too concerned at that particular establishment because, at least from my observation of what I could see in front, everybody was wearing a glove when they would handle the food. The place looked clean. Of course, I didn't know what it looked like behind in the kitchen, but but otherwise, I had no reason to be really real concerned. So, okay.
Thank you very much, and I want to just thank you guys. Your work, as we've seen the past few months, because we're entertaining a few measures that relate to environmental health, is very complex. The work of the environmental health specialists, and so the initiative in 2010 as well, when the legislature moved to modernize and expand the role of environmental health specialists. Is something that I want to ensure that we get to address soon, and I think and correct me if I'm wrong again, it also will help in your recruitment and retention of your staff. And so as we move forward and hopefully we get more. I mean that's the intent. We get more workforce housing units. Getting more, that means there's more construction activity happening. There's going to be that need to really ensure that your department is well equipped, and that you have the tools and resources necessary to carry out your mission there. So, just wanted to add that. If there's nothing else, we'll conclude this roundtable discussion, and we'll make a determination of the committee whether how to move forward, whether it is just allowing this to lapse and be adopted, or introducing a measure that makes some changes to it. Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.